Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for taking the time to be here. Appreciate you guys doing that. Today, we're going to just keep learning about a lot of the ethnicity of the colonists and American Indians, when it comes to the history of crypto Jews, Sephardic Jews, Muslim Moors coming over as so-called English, Huguenots or whatever else tag they had. Again, most of these people were being persecuted by the Catholics, so they went to many different countries as refugees under many different names. So we're going to read about part of history dealing with, so-called Jamestown and the lost colony again. You guys know we have done a lot of research on the lost colony in Jamestown and its Sephardic Jewish Moorish influence, those people's influence with American Indians. So we're going to read an article here from the IOSR, Journal of Humanities and Social Science. In case you don't know what the IOSR is, it's the International Organization of Scientific Research, all right? So, again, Journal of Humanities and Social Science, Volume 26, Issue 8, Series 3 from August 2021. It says here the fatal flaw in white Protestant supremacy, so-called white, because all Protestants and all Europeans are supposed to be white, right? So we're going to start the hijack with that on this article, right? But when we talk about Sephardic Jews or crypto Jews in general in colonial times, in general, we would say we're talking about melanated people, so-called black people, black Europeans. So again, it says the fatal flaw in Protestant supremacy. DNA evidence suggests Jamestown, Virginia, was founded and settled by persons of Jewish ancestry, instead of so-called English. Oh yeah. Elizabeth C. Hirschman, Hill Richmond Gott, Professor of Business, Department of Business and Economics, University of Virginia. Wise. Okay, and it says here in this part, the British colony at Jamestown, Virginia has long been an ideological touchstone for the political doctrine of Protestant supremacy in the United States. The triumph of the Jamestown settlers over the challenges of native attacks, harsh physical conditions, and inadequate provisions is seen as evidence of the innate superiority of these initial settlers. The present research challenges this foundational assumption by examining the ethnic origins of the Jamestown colony organizers and settlers using genealogical DNA methods and global DNA databases. These data indicate that the majority were likely of Jewish ethnicity, both Sephardic, let's say in Spanish, and some Ashkenazic, she's saying Eastern European. The study traces the origin of these persons to the Jews brought to England from Normandy in 1066 by William I and proposes that crypto-Jewish community was present in England from 1290 onward. Keywords: Jamestown Colony, Virginia Company, and so on, genealogy. It says introduction for many Americans. The English settlement at Jamestown serves as a potent symbol of Protestant America. It signifies the Anglo-Saxon spirit to overcome difficult challenges, to establish a civilization in the wilderness. Indeed, the settlement remains so deeply embedded in the American national consciousness that any attempt to question current beliefs about its origins will likely face a wall of skepticism. Revisionist efforts are further stymied by the lack of physical remnants from the colony's early years. Although archaeological excavation has revealed some of the early wooden structures and a few skeletal remains, there are sparse personal documents, religious relics, or items of apparel or weaponry remaining to help us understand the lifestyle of the early colonists. In their stead, we have layers of convenient ideological assumptions that these early settlers were of stalwart British stock and Protestant in their religious beliefs, all right? That's the false narration. The present research challenges these assumptions using a novel source of historically relevant evidence, genealogical ancestry tracing coupled with large-scale ethnic, regional, and national DNA databases. Analysis of these data suggests that the majority of the Jamestown colony organizers and colonists were of Jewish ancestry. In fact, data from several recently published DNA studies indicate that a large swath of colonial era North American colonists, listen, a large amount, both British and French, so-called British and French, were of Jewish ancestry. As mentioned above, a series of recent studies based on genealogical DNA and using publicly accessible databases indicates that most of North America, listen, from the 1500s to the 1700s, this is early colonial times, was settled by persons of Jewish ancestry. So when we're talking about of Jewish, we're talking about in general Sephardic Jews during this time, not Ashkenazi, even though they're adding that a little bit. They came much later. So from the 1500s to the 1700s, again, most of North America was settled by persons of Jewish ancestry. This may seem impossible. All right, this is what we've been learning always about this in real colonists, but in fact, the findings are a direct extension of earlier research into the settlement of South America, Central America, Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Caribbean, based upon a social cultural phenomenon termed crypto-Judaism, crypto-Jews. These studies have found that the majority of Spanish and Portuguese colonists in the New World were of Jewish ancestry, but had publicly presented themselves as Christians, all right? They were pretending to be Christians, cryptos, new Christians, conversos, Moranos, Moriscos, Moranos, Moreno, all right? We just, recently we've been reading a book on the Sephardic Jews, and the Atlantic trade and how they were very dominant there. This is all part of the same history here. Many of these colonists passed on knowledge of their religious heritage to their children. When genealogical DNA testing became available in the early 2000s, their modern-day descendants sent in samples to see if they were in fact of Jewish ancestry. Most learned that they are, and some have altered their religious affiliation as a result. Since the Spanish also had early settlements in what became British North America, studies were next directed toward populations in the United States to see if some Spanish Jewish Sephardic ancestry might be present there as well. These populations included the Lumbee Indian tribes in North Carolina, the Central Appalachian Watauga settlement in Appalachia, and the Plymouth Mayflower colony in Massachusetts. I told you who's the real pilgrims, who's these so-called Protestants and Puritans. That's what I told you guys in my video I did on that. The same pattern was found in these three sites as well. That is, the colonists for whom reliable DNA data were available were of Jewish ancestry, Sephardic Jews, but in each of the sites, not only Sephardic but also Ashkenazic Eastern European Jewish DNA was found as well. This was an important new discovery, for the existence of crypto-Judaism was generally believed to have occurred only among the Iberian Jews. Where could these Ashkenazic Jewish lineages have come from? Good question. Previous here says, as noted in that study, if these families converted publicly to Christianity while privately maintaining their Jewish identity, which they did, they could have established a network of mutual support, much as has been found among the Iberian crypto-Jewish population. This is exactly what they did. All right, so that did make them, make an effort to help each other and ship a lot of the people over here before the Catholics came to town, to Britain and all these other places they had been refugees in because of the Inquisition. So this would enable them to organize and finance large-scale colonization efforts and inspire that the colonists were of the same ancestry. So, all right, this pattern also what the DNA data suggests occurred in the Mayflower, Plymouth colony, the Roanoke, Lumbee colony, the Massachusetts Bay, New England colony, and as will be described below, in the Jamestown colony. This same pattern was also found among the Huguenot, just like the Huguenots. Who's the Huguenots? Ex-Moors, ex-Sephardic Jews as well, and Acadian French colonists in Canada, just like we have videos on. Same thing we're saying, she's letting you know, guys, because it's all the same people. I'm trying to tell you who's the Huguenots, who's the merchants, who's the Protestants, all right? It's all the same people, ethnic background. The Texas Old 300 colony as well seems to have been Sephardic Jews led by Stephen F. Austin in the early 1800s. We're going to get into all these black, so-called black founders and Sephardic Jews of the Southwest and the Western United States. We're about to get into specifically one by one all these histories as well. And the Ulster Scots, Northern Irish who immigrated to North America during the 1700s and settled in Appalachia, right? We're breaking that down too. Onward to Jamestown. Flowing from this series of prior studies, the present research proposes that the Jamestown venture also was planned, financed, and settled primarily by persons of Jewish ancestry. The data will show that some of their ancestral lines had been present in England since the Norman invasion of 1066, while others arrived in England and Wales as refugees from the Spanish and Portuguese expulsion of the Jews, like I said, from the Inquisition. They had been there as refugees in the late 1400s and early 1500s. There were a lot of cryptos over in England already. Although England officially banned Jews in 1290, there are numerous records indicating the presence of Sephardic Jews in the sceptered realm, especially during the long reign of Elizabeth I, especially during Elizabeth I's time. Often they entered under the guise of being Protestant, all right? That's why they were cryptos, secret Jews, and were welcomed into English economic life, as many were competent merchants, mariners, physicians, and vintners. Again, who's the merchants? That's what I've been trying to tell you guys. Because these people had connections, they had money, they were business people, they were welcome, and they would, turn a blind eye to who they were if they were Sephardic Jews or Muslim Moors, ex-Muslim Moors, Moranos, Moriscos, because of their business skills and their connections to other ports and other peoples, business-wise, bringing economy to wherever they went. Right? Remember, we've been learning that, reading that in recent books too. Why did England go to Virginia? Queen Elizabeth had been strongly encouraged to enter the colonial settlement arena by her close advisor, Sir Walter Raleigh. Elizabeth was promised riches, enhanced political power, and a stronger position on the world stage if she would plant an English colony on the Atlantic coast of the North America, much as had successfully been done in Northern Ireland. In the late 1500s, her first attempt, Roanoke, failed. And it says, although as mentioned above, descendants of survivors from the Roanoke colony have now been identified among the Lumbee Indian tribe of North Carolina, and these were in general Sephardic crypto-Jewish people, melanated folks, Black Europeans that were, in that lost colony, guys. Remember that. Now, I also want to remember that Queen Elizabeth at this moment was dealing with the Sultan of Morocco. They had split up the Americas. She had gotten North America, and he said, I'll take the Caribbean and the South America, and we can establish our plantations. You guys remember that video as well, right? So, upon Elizabeth's death, James VI of Scotland gained the throne of England, becoming James I. Once again, ambitious members of the royal court began encouraging their new monarch to expand his domain. It was proposed that another expedition to Virginia be undertaken to ensure that Britain gained its rightful place in the League of Global Nations. We now take a look at the ethnic origins of the organizers of this new expedition, the Virginia Company of London. Who were they, and why did they choose to invest in such a risky venture? What were their motives, beyond the publicly acknowledged ones of serving their noble King James, as well as earning substantial rewards for their investors? So right now I'm at the website DNAconsultants.com, home of the DNA fingerprint test. They have an article here, and again, they're going off, genetic testing here, guys. It says second wave of English Jews to the colonies, so-called English, huh? It says English crypto Jews disappear into the American colonies. They disappeared, huh? Part 3, second wave to the colonies, legal arrivals. And that's the hijack with the whitewashed images, even though that could be a brother. They just got him a little whitewashed. It says the legal immigrants, the second wave of crypto-Jewish immigration to the American colonies was radically different from the earlier wave, though only separated by 50 years. These colonists were primarily descendants of Jews who stayed in Spain and Portugal after the Edict of Expulsion and converted or pretended to. All right, they were pretending to be Christians, Protestants, and all this other stuff. They adopted an outward Catholic lifestyle for a time. Then they made their way to Bordeaux, Amsterdam, and London, and fully returned to the religion of their ancestors. When it became legal for Jews to reside in England in 1656, a steady stream of Sephardic Jews came. Sephardic. In London, they set up businesses and helped open a major synagogue, Bevis Marks, and where else? Aldgate, 1701. Very quickly, they sent family members to the other English colonies in the Americas, Barbados first, followed by Jamaica, and then the other 13 American colonies. All the Jewish settlers sent to Savannah in 1733 had Bevis Marks to thank for their passage, all right? Sephardic Jews in Savannah, Georgia. Some Iberian conversos become openly practicing Jews while English subjects in England. Others became English subjects and practicing Jews after moving directly to the English colonies. Here are a few examples. In Jamaica on Tuesday, the 25th of November, 1740, the following Sephardic Jews became English citizens, all right? In Jamaica, right? Didn't Farrakhan say his dad was a Jew, a Portuguese Jew from Jamaica, right? His dad is from Jamaica, and he's saying he's a Portuguese Jew. It matches the history here. It says that these people who ended up as citizens of Jamaica or English citizens, they were Sephardic Jews, as Jacob Mendes Gutierrez, these are from the 1740s, right? Benjamin Bravo, Abraham Ribeiro, Moses Lopez Henriquez, Jacob Pinto Brandon, David Bravo, Isaac Furtado, Moses Martins, Del Miss da Costa, Isaac Ramalho, Moses Cohen de Lara, and Aaron Lamera. It says here in New York, between the 1st of June 1740 and the 1st of June 1741, the following Sephardic Jews became English citizens: David Gomez, Mordecai Gomez, Daniel Gomez, Jacob Terrell, Samuel Levi, Samuel Myers Cohen, Abraham Myers Cohen, Abraham Isaacs, Isaac Levi, Solomon Myers, Joseph Simpson, Solomon Barris, David Huey, Abraham Rodriguez de Riveres, Daniel Rodriguez Vinera, Moses Lopez, Judah Hayes, and Levi Samuel. These groups of crypto Jews arrived at the colonies as practicing Jews, whether they made a stop in London or came directly to America. They were not just practicing Jews, but practitioners who belonged what was known as the nation or nação, sometimes the Portuguese nation. You guys hear that? This nation may have had its conceptual roots in the nation system of Bruges, but more than that, it was created by Iberian Jewish history. People of color, so-called Black Europeans, Black Jews, Sephardic Jews, Iberian converted Jews were referred to as New Christians or members of the Hebrew nation or the nation or nation. Once outside the Iberian Peninsula, these people with a shared history, with origins deep in Iberian life, formed a new interconnected united web, one which they called the nation, you see? So as they started fleeing the Inquisition and settling in different parts of the world, in Europe and the American colonies, they had established businesses and ports. So they started interconnecting because they were from the same nation, same people. This is what we've been learning about them, right? The port Jews and all the merchants and all the business, all the first plantations, first colonists. You know, it makes sense that they would have these people help them settle the Americas. So again, once they were outside, they had connected. The nation was a network of Iberian Jewish refugees living in Africa, Amsterdam, London, Boston, New York, Jamaica, Charlestown, right? South Carolina, right? Savannah, Barbados, Suriname, and more. They were all over the place. The nation had leaders based in London and a rigid set of rules all members of the nation were meant to obey in the far-flung colonies. Failure to oblige yourself of the rules could and did result in expulsion from the nation. It meant being cut off from the trade network. You blacklisted that spanned the globe. members of the nation followed the rules. For several generations, these early and legal Jewish immigrants to the colonies married amongst themselves. They became rich, affluent, and assimilated, right, with the locals. Within the span of 2 generations, they began to marry non-Jews and disappear into the upper echelons of colonial and American society. It has been said the Bible of early American Jewish genealogy, First American Jewish Families, written by Malcolm Stern, was first titled Americans of Jewish Descent. Because most of these early arrivals disappeared into colonial society early on, many a blue blood member of the Daughters of the American Revolution have a forgotten Jewish ancestor. The role of Sephardic and Muslim Moors, crypto Jews in America, guys, and in the blood of many Americans today. Naturalizations of foreign Protestants in the American and West Indian colonies, pursuant to Statute 13, George II, the publication of the Huguenot Society of London, Volume 24, Sherrod and Hughes, 1921. Now it says here, Douglas Sharp, PhD, is a historical consultant who contributes pieces on crypto-Jewish genealogy. He is the creator of the site Hidden Jewish Ancestry, which is highly recommended. One of his current history genealogy projects is to make the so-called alien rolls of London better known. These records mark the appearance in England and thence to America of Sephardic Jewish families. Oh, that's something we're going to definitely get into, right? Sephardic Jewish families in England that came to the Americas, which we think of today as good old English stock. And everybody's saying, oh, the English, and that's what I've been trying to tell you guys. So-called English, fighting against the Catholics, or was it Sephardic Jews who are Protestants now fighting against Catholics who are persecuting them because they're crypto Jews, such as Adams, Anderson, Drake, right? Drake, Davis, and others, all these Sephardic Jewish families or names, right? He's telling you. So again, we're in this book here, A Genealogical History, Jews and Muslims in British and Colonial America, all right, by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. But we're talking about Sephardic and Moorish people. You know, we've gone over this a lot in my past videos. As it says here, the Jewish blackness. The notion of the blackness of the Jews or Jewish blackness has become commonplace in scholarly discourse, going back to the path-breaking work of Senator L. Gilman in the late 1980s. All right. Scholars often assert that a strong European tradition dating back to the Middle Ages maintained that the Jews were black, or at least swarthy, and find sharp expression in modern anti-Semitic literature. All right. Says Melamed in 2003, page 31, says that in medieval literature, a theory prevailed in which the Jews were part of the black race, or at least dark-skinned, or that general look at the Jew was considered to be like that of the black. All right. And that's from one source right there. This is, again, we're going over a video that we went over. This is another book, I guess, The Natural History of Man by James Cowler Pritchard. Volume 1, 1855. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. All right. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. Let's not forget that. All right. Very dark. All right. Let's not forget that. Very dark. Throughout this presentation, let's remember when they bring up crypto Jews, crypto Muslims, crypto or Portuguese colonists. Who are the Portuguese really colonists? They're coming. They're crypto Jews. All right. Sephardic Jews. And the Jews of Portugal are very dark. This is the book we read when Scotland was Jewish. DNA evidence, archaeology, analysis of migrations and public and family records show 12th century Semitic roots. All right. So we're correlating everything. We talk about the Melungeons in this video, break it down a little bit. All right. We're talking about Kennedy. And then we're talking about what? We're talking about, as it says here, that the Scottish aristocrats, the Scottish royal stewards, were equally dark and Semitic in appearance. All right, the stewards. Who's the stewards? King James. King James was a steward. We know he was a so-called black man. Of Charles II dusky appearance, his mother, Queen Henrietta Maria, had been half mortified, writing after her confinement that the child was so dark, she was ashamed of him. He was quickly dubbed the Black Boy.
Enemies made out that he was a black bastard, begotten by a black Scotsman. All right, so a lot of these families that were actually Sephardic Jewish, we broke down from Scotland, and Campbell, Forbes, Leslie, Douglas. We already know Douglas. That means black. Doug, Dub.
Again, I know a lot of people are new to this. They might have never known that the Huguenots were Moors. Just going over some information here that we've gone over many, many times. This is the book History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors by Henry Copey, written in 1892. We're on page 445. And right there, they're talking about Christopher Columbus and how he believed only Moorish civilization was good, and that his vessel was fitted out in that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. His sailors were many of them men with Moorish blood in their veins. It has been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in the south of France, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots. Who became Huguenots? Moors. Moors when they were driven out. Moors, right? Moors when they were driven out of Spain and Portugal. They ended up in southern France, became known as Huguenots, right? They're being persecuted by the Catholics. So this is a beef they had. Huguenots are Moors and Sephardic Jews as well.
Now, all right, Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. Chapter 3, Virginia's first and not so English colony. A volume of documents edited by Stephen B. Quinn on the Roanoke settlements begins by discussing Richard Halliock the Younger. So we know that Halliock in the previous videos, that was a Moorish Sephardic family, the last name. All right, the Halliock collection is one of the biggest book collections for like these ancient voyages, not ancient, but colonial Middle Age voyages, and any documents. They have a huge collection, the Halliock Society. A lot of my sources are coming out of their, what they scanned from their libraries. It says here, Richard Halliock the Younger and his older kinsman, Richard Halliock, the two men helped provide the cartography, justification, and promotion for English colonization in America. Of interest is that the elder Halliock corresponded with contacts living in Spanish-held Mexico and Portuguese-held Goa in India during the 1560s. We maintain that given Britain's staunch anti-Catholic position at the time, his contacts could be of no other persuasion than crypto-Jewish, all right? His contacts were all what? Crypto-Jewish. Remember, we talked about the Protestant so-called the port Jews who had all the ports unlocked in the Atlantic. These Morisco, crypto Jewish, crypto Muslim people. They were the ones who were, again, the cartographers, the shipbuilders, the sailors, the ones in the commerce and the trade with the Indians, with the local indigenous populations of the Americas all over. Again, crypto Jewish, and it's letting us know here, all the context here, of course, are going to be crypto Jewish. Of interest as well is that he learned Italian from his friend John Florio. All right, Florio's Sephardic surname, Sephardic, remember? It's very dark complexion, the blackness, remember, let's not forget. Sephardic, we're just talking about so-called colored people, black, so-called black people. And especially when we're talking about 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, even up to 1800s, and still now, man, just a lot of people don't know the ancestry. In order to read navigational documents in that language, he then worked with Stephen Parmenius to compile a multilingual set of documents on Eastern North America. Parmenius was the son of converts to Christianity from Turkish-held Hungary, Turks, right? Converts. Whether a Jewish or Muslim faith is not mentioned, all right? Although knowledge of Hebrew argues for the latter, right? Muslim, they're saying. And sailed with Sir Humphrey Gilbert, dying like Gilbert at sea in 1582. Not content with this, Halliock also gathered information from botanist Pierre Pina, all right? Pina, Sephardic surname, as well as merchants, all right? Who's the merchants? We broke this down a lot. Who's all the merchant families? A lot of this Moorish Muslim Sephardic Jewish families were the merchants and navigators in Paris and Rouen, two crypto-Jewish hotbeds, all right? Hotbeds, crypto-Jewish hotbeds, Paris and Rouen, all right? Y'all in France hearing me, you know, just know that's the history. He then produced the documents that was to make the winning case for English colonization in the New World. The stock he proposed as settlers of this new frontier were Englishmen and women who might be regarded as surplus to the needs of their own land. These surplus persons, we will show, are those recently driven to England by religious persecution in Iberia and France. All right. All right. Put this down. Sorry. Conversos and Moriscos, who were adamantly anti-Catholic and desperate enough to climb aboard a cramped, unsafe boat to settle in a faraway terra incognita, inhabited by ravening beasts and treacherous natives. So who were these so-called English that were sending over here in cramped ships, right? Ships, Deuteronomy 28 ships. Yeah, crossing the Middle Passage. Recently driven to England. These were people who were recently driven to England by religious persecution in Iberia and France. People coming from France and Portugal and Spain. Iberia was big. Iberian Empire, you know, could even be North Africa, you know, parts of Italy, most of the Mediterranean. All right, so a lot of these people ended up in England. England was a major spot where a lot of these Huguenots, a lot of these people were persecuted, a lot of indentured servitude. People were just being sent there to work. And from there, they would ship out people to the American colonies, as they're letting us know right here. All right, again, we're just talking about, you know, swarthy people here. All right, gotta break the spell. It's not all white people. We're talking about conversos and moriscos, who are anti-Catholic and desperate enough to climb aboard cramped, unsafe boats to settle in a faraway land in the promised land. All right, even if just treacherous natives, as they say, right? Wild Indians over there. In this respect, they followed the example of their co-religionists who remained in Iberia and who under cover, all right, under a cover of Christian conversion, right? It was just a cover. They weren't really Christians. Eagerly boarded vessels bound for the new Spanish colonies in the Americas. Bound, all right? Bound. Literally bound, like bounded, like indentured. Bound. All right, a crypto-Jewish refuge in northern New Mexico lasted from 1579 to 1591. We're going to get into that deeply, the southwestern U.S., who were these founders, these first Europeans settling over there. All right. A lot of them were actually Muslims, crypto-Jews. Yeah, people of color from Europe. Yeah, from Iberia. Yep. We're going to break all this down. It says here, perhaps these early forerunners of the Eastern European Jews who embraced the America as the Golden Land at a much later date. All right. So now they're talking about the Ashkenazis. So these are the forerunners. Who were first? The crypto-Jews were here first. They were the forerunners of the Eastern Europeans, all right? Who came much later date, learned through surreptitious correspondence that life was endurable. There, despite the forbidden environment, they must have calculated that better fortunes lay in making the journey than in remaining in some Protestant-held way stations, such as England, France, or Holland. All right, so all these Protestant countries, especially these Protestant countries, were the ones that had all these so-called Jews and Muslims. Why? Again, same people. What is a Protestant? Again, another Christian cover. It's just another Christian cover. They just been there longer under that title, Protestant. All right. We've broken this down. A lot of these Sephardic people, a lot of these Iberian people were all the way 1200s already in England, you know, and Scotland. We got that already. A lot of these prominent family clans and all that, like the Stuarts we got, right? Very dark and so-called Semitic, as they were calling it. So, you know, these Protestant havens, especially when the Counter-Reformation dragnet seemed to be Tyrants controlling Europe. Part of the resurgence of Catholicism was the confinement of Jews in ghettos. Jews were ghettoized in Rome. All right, we're not talking about recent times. In Rome, the Jews were in the ghettos, in Rome by Pope Julius IV in 1555, and in Florence in 1571, setting off a new wave of expulsions in Italy, the Holy Roman Empire in France. The age of the ghetto will last until 1796. The age of the ghetto? What you talking about, man? We still in the ghetto, man. What you talking about? It's never expired. Man, so yeah, you can see like who was in these so-called ghettos, right? In Europe, we're talking about a whole different lifetime, right? If to us it's like a movie, like when we think about 1500s, but just picture all these colored people living in ghettos in Europe in the 1500s, the age of the ghettos, as they're saying right here. It says Halleck's efforts to promote the planting of Virginia were assisted by his friends Martin Bassanier, Sephardic surname, a Parisian printer. All right, Bassanier, Sephardic surname. And again, he's the printer. He's the one in charge of printing. All right, you want a book, you got to go to him. All right, he's the connect. He also obtained permissions from cartographers, Laudonnière and Mendoza, Sephardic surname, to reprint portions of their navigational tracts of the New World. This type of international effort to direct surplus persons to a new homeland was quite unlikely to be undertaken, except by organizers who had a personal interest in the matter. All right? There was a reason behind it, and these people are not just financing because they just, doing it because they want to colonize and make England great. No, they had a special interest, these Sephardics bringing their people over here so they can be free over here, right? Freedom of religion, right? Freedom of religion. Freedom of religion, ain't that part of the Constitution and all that? American Revolutionary War. Who was really fighting these wars and for what? All right, we're going to break all this down. We're going to have a correct history. All right. There's a special interest in this colonization. The monopolization of the British colonization effort by a handful of interconnected, intermarried families. All right. Interconnected, intermarried families in Cornwall and Devon, chapter 1. All right, we broke this down in chapter 1. Remember who was in England? Who was in England running the finance, getting it all ready for their cousins, the port Jews and the traders and the merchants and the shipbuilders and the navigators to make it happen, colonize. All right, intermarried, interconnected families. Keep it in the family. But again, it's all business. Remember the last video? It's all business. Just as Zionists finally succeeded in establishing the state of Israel after the Holocaust. So that was an example of the Sephardic Jews and these Moorish people were doing this way back throughout Europe. And when it came to, the 13 colonies, it seems probable that a similar plan underpinned the attempt by British crypto Jews, Sephardic conversos, and Moriscos to establish New Jerusalem on the Atlantic shores of North America. All right. Now, I just want to emphasize something in case, we got any doubters here or anything, any new people who might just have a hard time understanding what we're talking about here. Like, all this, British crypto Jews, Sephardic, a lot of, these are colored people, so-called black people. All right. Breaking it down, just with all these tags, just put all these tags on top of them, if that's how it helps you imagine it better. But as you can see, these have sources. So it has footnotes. This book has great sources. Like, these are real historical sources. We're not just reading from this book because we believe these authors. But these authors did a lot of good work, historical and genealogical. They broke it down. All right. And it's not a white thing. It's just truth. Truth has no color. All right. A Morisco, all right, Who's coming over here? Conversos moriscos. Morisco is a Moor. A morisco is a Muslim converted over to Christianity. It's a Moor under the cover of Christianity. A cover of Christianity. Morisco. Over the past 2 decades, Jewish scholars have gradually recognized that it was Sephardic Jews, all right? Not the better known Ashkenazim, not Ashkenazi Jewish people, Israeli, and again, no disrespect intended or anything. We're just talking about history here, and they know their history. So it says, again, we're starting to realize for the past 2 decades, whenever this book was written, like in the 90s, I believe, or 2000, early 2000, have gradually recognized that it was Sephardic Jews, not the better known Ashkenazim of Central Europe, who acted as avatars of modernization. What does that tell you? That's deep. And who was the Sephardic Jews? All right, who in the very beginning of this video, what did I tell you about the Jews of Spain and Portugal? Swarthy, so-called black, very dark-skinned people. We're talking about colored people were what? The avatars of modernization, right? Let's just break it down. So-called black people, avatars of modernization. But again, it's past colors because people are just people. We got to stop looking at history with crayon colors, right? It's just people being people. All right. But the fact is that these Ashkenazim of Central Europe weren't the originals, all right? It was Sephardic Jews. Talking about people of color here, all right? Straight up. And they laid the groundwork for collective identity and the eventual emancipation of Jews. Tracks such as Amsterdam Chief Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel's The Hope of Israel stirred popular yearning for such a utopia of religious tolerance, all right? A utopia in America. He's writing that in America. He's promoting that. Religious tolerance and American Indian-style sovereignty and self-reliance. American Indian style, not European style. They had a different plan, some of them. According to Ben Israel's biographer, Cecil Roth, the Sephardic Messianic Manifesto beat a royal way through the steppes, forests, and villages of the Ashkenazi Jews. It was, one must remember, an era of messianism and false messiahs. Asher Lenin, Martin Luther, all right, look at all these famous people, right? Like Martin Luther, Asher Lenin, 1502, Martin Luther, seen by Jews as precursor to the Messiah. David Ruveni, 1523, Solomon Mosher, burned at the stake, 1532. Donna Gracia, Nazi. All right, Nazi, yeah, that's a so-called Jewish name. It's resettled Jews in Palestine, 1560, and that was a title. That was the Nazi was the prince, or the title of the prince under the Moorish Empire in Spain and Portugal. The Jews lived well. A lot of Jews lived well with their Moorish brothers. But a lot of the Sephardic Jews were converts to Judaism. They were actually Muslim. So that happened a couple of times where large populations converted over. But they were actually Muslim first. All right. And it says Luis de Carvajal killed in Mexico, 1596. The Carvajals. I think we're going to get a story about them and how they ended up in San Antonio, actually. It says the name Michael Israel, Hope of Israel, became the top choice for some of the first Jewish congregations of the New World, Curacao, Savannah, and Philadelphia. Virginia exercised a fascination and magnetic pull for Jews similar to the Antilles, Virgin Islands, St. Croix, Nevis, and St. Thomas. Barbados, Jamaica, the Guianas, Curacao, Suriname, and other locations outside the grip of Spanish control, or they mean Catholic control. All right, because a lot of these people were, again, Iberians, so they are Spanish. A lot of them are Spanish. You understand? So it's not about Spain versus English or Iberians versus, no, so it's a religious war a lot of the time here. And we broke down in the previous videos and nations of the world, all these islands, what they were doing, what was going on. Barbados, Jamaica, the Guianas, and Curacao, and Suriname, how they were being kicked out of Brazil, and they had to go to these islands, and then from there getting kicked out. Every time Spanish came around or the Catholics came around, they would have to keep moving, eventually ending up Florida, South Carolina, Louisiana, Virginia, New York, all those places. Says here, the first voyage to Roanoke in 1584 had as captains Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, both of whom, to judge by their surnames, were almost certainly Sephardic. The ship's company included William Greenfield, brother of Richard, mentioned above, perhaps originally Campo Verde, Greenfield. All right, we broke this down in the previous video. Greenfield was Campo Verde, which is the same in Spanish. John and Benjamin Wood, perhaps Silva, James Brovowich, Henry Green, Nicholas Petman, John Hughes, and Simon Ferdinando, a known Portuguese converso. All right. Again, Portuguese were what? Very dark complexion. Read that already. Primary source. The second voyage in 1585, undertaken again by Sir Richard Grenville at the request of Sir Walter Raleigh, or shall I say, de la Raleigh. Remember? We got who Walter Raleigh was too, and Francis Drake, right? Remember? De la Raleigh. It got anglicized to Raleigh. De la Raleigh. Carried as its principal company Master Raphael Lane, Master Thomas Candish from Candy, Master John Arundel, Clark, and others. Over the years, in instance after instance, Jewish soundings or Spanish sounding names have been anglicized to Christianize and specifically Anglicanize. All right, that's exactly what I was just letting you know right there. All right. The history of English colonization, agreement was soon written as Granville or Grandville. Simon was transformed into Simons, right? So Simon to Simons. Again, pay attention because you see a lot of this in the genealogy. When you're doing your genealogy, you'll see names change, but you see it's similar. And there's a reason behind that. And that's what I'm trying to show you guys. Like, why would certain people just all of a sudden just write their name a little differently all of a sudden? And because they were trying to, again, anglicize, Christianize, or Anglicanize. Granville was soon written as Granville. Okay, so we got that. Baruch becomes Brooks. So Baruch means blessed or blessings, blessed. Baruch in Hebrew became Brooks. All right, Brooks is Baruch, Sephardic Jewish name. And Locke acquired the more familiar appearance of Locke, L-O-C-K-E. We have seen how Drake's arms and origins were whitewashed by historians. What? All right. I didn't say it, man. All right. Kurimeo, stop making up things. All right. So the author's right here saying somebody got whitewashed. All right. Francis Drake. Hold on. Shout out to Troy Johnson. All right. Big shout out to Troy Johnson. Again, if you haven't seen this video, we broke down Francis Drake, who he was. This is a more real depiction of what Francis Drake would look like based on the many sources that describe him. And so he's letting us know, right, how Drake's arms and origins were whitewashed by historians. Whitewashed, all right? Whitewash. He's going to show some examples of the whitewash because I know he got some portraits in his book. As before, the ships stopped first at the Canary Islands, a land with large converso Morisco population. Who's Moriscos again? Muslims who converted to Christianity. Talking about so-called black people. Not get that mixed up. All right. Where? In the Canary Islands. Large population of them there. All right. We got that in chapter 2. Let's not forget. Check out the previous videos. Upon reaching the North American mainland, near Cape Fear, the ship's log discusses Captain Aubrey and Captain Moniton, Sephardic surname, a trading family later active in Jamaica. All right, a lot of Sephardic Jews in Jamaica. All right, the list of colonists left to settle at Roanoke is given in Appendix E in original spelling of the time, with a bit of decipherment. The pattern seems clear. Can names such as John Gostigo, Antoine Ruse or Rose, Thomas Parry, Joseph Borges, Spanish surname, or Borges, and Bennett, Baruch. Bennett, we broke this down. Again, Bennett, all right, the slave master, so-called slave master of Anthony Johnson, the first so-called black person to really own a slave for life, right? Anthony Johnson from Virginia. This was the guy he was indentured to, Bennett. Not this guy, I mean, but we already got, it was a Bennett. And Bennett is Baruch, so Sephardic. So that was a person of color too. All right, so not to mention Dugan Ganis, our friend Joaquim Gans. Be those of typical Britons? Are those British surnames? No, they're not. Obviously not. Obviously not. All right, so come on out of here with your hijack. You got to do real research. You got to understand genealogy. After the voyage to Virginia, Thomas Harriot wrote a glowing promotional report of the discoveries, noting that the metallurgist Gans had not only found rich copper ore, but also silkworms, flax and hemp, pitch, tar, rosin, and turpentine, saffron, cedar, luscious sweets, oily iron, pearl. He argued that the climate was entirely suitable for growing sugar cane, oranges, and lemons, and that a new kind of grain, maize, had been found, a new type of grain. All right, for all you guys, always, come with the hijack and my corn videos, talking about Kurimeo, corn, it's not grain and corn, it's not this. And they weren't talking, they were talking about weed and grain is that and all this and that. They're letting you know they're calling maize a grain here. So a lot of the times when we see grains in Europe and all these old world writings, a lot of the times they're talking about maize. They're talking about that Turkish weed they had, that Turkish weed. Yeah, which is only coming from America. So somebody was over there before Columbus came. All right, maize in the old world, but it's American. Yes. How did it get over there? How did it get to ancient China? How did it get to ancient Egypt? Supposedly, right? How did it get over there? If it's American, we brought it out to the world. So they got a new kind of grain of maize. They have found it. They're like, word. The effort proved unlucky, however. In a few months, the settlers became homesick and discouraged. Walter Raleigh, or De la Raleigh, asked Francis Drake, his cousin, right? Remember, they were cousins, busy raiding Spanish New World settlements in an anti-papist rage, right? So these are the pirates. These people are going around and, ravaging and pirating the Catholic ships, or the Catholic ports all over the Americas. That's what he's having fun doing. To check up on the venture, says Jane McDermott provides some insight into the machinations connected with these voyages. It says here, Raleigh, the chief promoter of the Roanoke colony, was also a backer of Drake's expedition, so must have had the opportunity to discuss the matter with him. The most lasting service that Drake could provide to them was that which he undertook from the moment he discerned Spanish activity upon the Florida coast, to remove the greatest potential threat to any English colonial presence on the North American coast. On 27th of May, the ship's watchers made out a beacon on the Florida shore. Behind it, they found a fortified Spanish settlement, that of St. Augustine. Ostensibly, there seems little reason for Drake to investigate this place further, whose existence until that moment had not been suspected. His men prior experience at Santo Domingo and Cartagena, the probability that the settlement would not be worth the plunder, his captain's growing urgency to return to England, all suggest that the English fleet would have been inclined to ignore the new challenge. Yet not only did it pause here, but after attacking and dispersing the Spanish garrison, and an assault in which Frobisher and Drake personally led 20 men into the fort and repulsed a subsequent attempt by local Indians to recapture it for their Spanish masters, the English force razed the town and fort so thoroughly as to render it uninhabitable. So you see, Drake and was pirating and plundered St. Augustine. All right, straight up. Similar thing happened there. There was actually Acadians there before the Spanish, so-called Spanish, had got in there. They had kicked the Acadians out, and then came the so-called English. Here came Drake, the Sephardis, back, right? They got some revenge, right? Because a lot of their Acadian, brethren were actually Sephardic and Huguenots and all that. We got that, right? Who was the Acadians? All right. So again, it becomes a religious war. not a country versus this war or Spanish versus English. That's how we was taught that. It really was bigger than that. It says here, only biggest summary provided the reason for such brutal treatment. In this place called St. Augustine, we understood the Spanish king, example, Philip II, did keep, as it before said, 150 soldiers. And at another place, some dozen leagues beyond, to the northwards, called St. Helena, he did there likewise keep 150 more, serving for no other purpose than to keep all other nations from inhabiting any part of that coast. All right, that's a big drop right there. He had people from Spain, his people there, just to colonize, even if they had no purpose, even if they had lost the war. He just left them there, just so other nations wouldn't inhabit it. All right, what we talking about here? And what happened to all these so-called Spanish people that were left there? Hundreds of them in these two different places. All right, they had descendants. They were mixing with somebody, right? Who's all around there? Bunch of Indians, right? Having thus wreaked revenge on the Spanish king, Drake proceeded to Roanoke settlement, where he intended to set down hundreds of slaves freed from the enemy in Santo Domingo and Cartagena to serve as laborers for the colony. All right, who are these people that got freed? There remained the small matter of finding it. Though 1584 voyage of Amadas and Barlow had explored the Carolina banks, the precise latitude had not been made available to Drake prior to his sailing. In addition, he was ignorant of whether the colony had actually been established, for Greenville's 1585 Roanoke expedition had returned to England more than a month after he himself had embarked. Let us continue in the words again of McDermott. It says here, St. Helena was the northernmost extent of the Spanish presence on the Eastern American continent. The Englishmen saw no other trace of civilized habitation until 9 June, when a large bonfire on the shoreline of Hatteras Bank signaled the presence of their countrymen, leaving the ships outside the so-called Port Ferdinando, the colony's landing place, a small island in a shallow inlet just north of Cape Hatteras. Drake and his captains took their pinnacles into Roanoke Sound and were greeted by the colony's commander, Ralph Lane. As McDermott points out, Drake's rescue mission suggests a premeditated plan to assist the colony. All right, they had connections. That was a plan here. He had previously sent Lane a letter with Captain Edward Stafford in which he offered to supply provisions necessary to the colony. Meanwhile, the promised supply ship from England and the relief expedition under Granville were delayed. During this time, the goodwill of the local Algonquin Indian tribes had evaporated. Next, Edgau's Milton well summarizes in his account the powerful chief Huguenot, all right? The powerful chief Huguenot refused to provide any more food to the settlers. Lane, the grim veteran of the Irish wars, marched on his village and treacherously put the chief, along with all his deputy chiefs, to the sword. So you see what he did to him? Because he said, you know what? I'm not feeding you guys anymore. What value do I have? I'm not doing this, working for you guys anymore. And what happened? They went with the sword, right? A threatened attack by an alliance of tribes aimed at wiping the Englishmen out was thus prevented. But now only one group of native Indians, those of Croatan Island, were friendly to the Englishmen, right? So the Croatans were the only ones kind of still allying with the Englishmen. The other ones were already tired of them there. These so-called Englishmen, right? Because again, remember, a lot of these were Sephardic Jews, Iberian people, Moriscos. And the Croatians' own supply of corn was also exhausted. Drake's offer was a godsend. All right, so they were, these Indians getting left out of food because of, they were giving it to their allies, and Drake was like, "Yo, I'll bring you food and some slaves and all that. I'll help you guys out." So the colonists decided in council convened on June 16th to ask Drake to transport them all back to England. They were like, "Yo, can you bring us back home?" As none believed that he promised relief from England would arrive in time, they decamped with such hate that they piled their equipment higgledy-piggledy into boats, and 3 colonists absent on business somewhere in the bush were simply abandoned. They just left him behind. They're like, hey, where's Bobby? I don't know, man. He left. He said he'll be back. All right, let's just leave him behind. The fleet made its getaway on June 1584, ending the first chapter of England's colonization in the New World on a note of defeat and ignominy. Ignominy. All right, excuse me, please. All right, so that's Roanoke guy, unsuccessful, right? The second Roanoke colony, it says here. 2 years later, another colony was established at Roanoke. Its leader was a civilian named John White, an artist and adventurer known to speak Spanish, who evidently had Spanish connections. I remember that White, a lot of Whites are actually LeBlanc, which is white. We got that in a past video. So it says he spoke Spanish, so maybe, possibly. He was quite familiar with the coastal interior and the Spanish, who attempted in 1571 to establish a mission there. On this foray by the Spanish, William B. Cridlin, a Virginia historian, writes, all right, so we went over this. We're going to talk about Allion right now. This is an old school video I did. Very deep. He comes on in a couple videos I did. Allion, very deep information with Allion coming from the Caribbean. He's bringing up Sephardic Jewish indentured servants. Talking about Black Europeans. He's also bringing up Caribs and Arawaks. All right. Which are being called so-called Negroes. And this is way before 1619. So, if we go with history, they're even wrong because they contradict themselves all the time. Because there was so-called Black people being brought up. And we already know there was so-called Black people here. When we talk about, I guess, these so-called Black Europeans, first, they were already here in the 1500s, with the Spaniards, right? So-called Spaniards. Who's these guys? Who's these Spaniards? All right, so it says here, the documents record that 1 year after the exploration of the peninsula by Verrazano, Lucas Vasquez de Allion, a lawyer and judge of Santo Domingo, obtained a patent from King Charles, or Carlos, so Carlos, right, of Spain, authorizing him to explore and plant a settlement on the American mainland. It was in June 1526 that Allion set sail with 3 small vessels from Puerto de la Plata, Santo Domingo. Accompanying him were 600 men, women, and children. All right, this is what I was saying. He had a lot of people with him. A lot of these were Indians, Sephardic Jews, Moors, indentured servants, and his rest of his buddies, pirate buddies. With sufficient supplies and 150 horses, the Allion entered the Chesapeake Bay, which he named Madre de las Aguas, or Mother of Waters, and ascending the Guandape, James River, right, the Guandape, landed at a place he called St. Michael, or San Miguel. All right, this is one of the first towns there. It's actually, can research this, San Miguel. St. Michael was the second colony attempted on the mainland of North America. After that, established by Ponce de Leon at Charlotte Harbor, Florida, in 1521. The Allions soon died of fever, and the settlement passed through a deadly winter marked by plague, Indian attacks, and a slave insurrection. All right, so their slaves were like, you know what? So who was the slaves again? We're talking about a lot of these Black Latinos, these Sephardic Jews. They were sending, they were trying to get rid of the Moors and the Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal. And no better place than to send them to work in the plantations. That's what they thought. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Use these people to colonize, get rid of them at the same time. And, it works out for everybody. But again, then you get things like this. We got slave insurrections. That's how a lot of these people also escaped, ran off with Indians. We got a lot of the Moranos. We got a lot of mixing. We got a lot of, coming together, even the Indians with these people coming together and again doing the insurrection. So a lot of these slaves, you have to prove it if that they were African, because what history teaches us, according to the original primary sources of what these people are writing, who they are enslaving and who they are carrying in their ships, it's Indians and their own free labor, which is coming from their country and other places, not Africa. So it says, Cridlin continues the story of Spain's thwarted efforts at establishing a presence in the region. Says here, no further attempt at colonization was made until 1570, when Menendez, governor of Florida, the serious of a colony on the Chesapeake, fitted out an expedition headed by Father Segura and Luis Quiros, assisted by 6 Jesuit brothers named Soli, Mendez, Linares, Redondo, Gabriel, Gomez, Sancho Cevalles, all conversos. All right, all these are what? Moorish people. Conversos. They converted. The expedition planted its little colony on the banks of the Rappahannock, but was soon betrayed by a supposedly converted Indian who had received the baptismal name of Don Luis de Velasco, a Sephardic name. A supposedly converted Indian, huh? De Velasco, conspiring with other Indians, massacred the unsuspecting Spaniards to a man, and it was not until the following spring that Mendez learned of the disaster through a pilot he had sent with supplies. He immediately sailed for Axacan, as the settlement was called, captured and hanged the murderers. When Captain John Smith of Jamestown explored the Rappahannock, he found an Indian, Mosco. Example, mosque, a Muslim name, Mosco. Morisco, Mosco, with whom he could converse, presumably in Spanish. All right, did you know John Smith spoke Spanish? All right, you hear, this is a history they will never try to tell you. They don't even want you to even think of things like this. All right, and used as an interpreter. So they used him as an interpreter. How lucky were they, huh? And they were using Spanish. John Smith used Spanish to talk to this Indian, so the Indian could translate it to the, in the Indian language. Moscow was a lighter complexion than the other natives and wore a beard. Evidently, he was a descendant of the ill-fated colony. All right, so this so-called Indian was actually a Sephardic Jew. You see that, a Muslim Moor. All right. He was one of the descendants of the ill-fated colony. Smith and Newport also had found an Indian, whom they used as interpreter, on their voyage to the Falls of the James, just 10 days after landing at Jamestown. And it is reported that they also saw a Jew of light complexion and an old Indian with a beard. Presumably, they were descendants from the Spanish settlement of St. Michael. It says here, Raleigh's second expedition had 94 colonists, including women and children. The families were supposed to be planted farther north at Chesapeake Bay, but the transport ships peremptorily abandoned them at Roanoke in order to pursue their preferred business of raiding Spanish treasure fleets in the Caribbean. They just got rid of them. Like, yeah, you guys get off here. White quickly returned to England to obtain supplies and reinforcements, but it was the year of the Spanish Armada's invasion, and England was focused on repelling the attacks. He was not able to return until August 1590, when he found the entire settlement abandoned. The only trace left by the second colonist was the word Croatoan carved into a tree. You see what happened? So look at all these people again, these abandoned settlements. All these people were being left behind. Again, a lot of these are so-called Black Europeans. All right. And they even say that they does that indicate that they went and mixed with the Croatan? So like, why they leave that on the tree there? As before, they present a markedly un-English impression. The occupations of lawyers, professors, mathematicians, and the like, as well as the Mediterranean foodstuffs they carried as provisions, do not appear anything like the norm of Northern European pioneers in the New World. The settlement date of 1587 was only 1 year before the well-announced Spanish invasion of England. These surplus persons who had hardly gotten their feet on the ground in England were willingly enlisted as a voyage to America, provided the means to escape the feared arrival of the Inquisition. So what is the Inquisition? Yeah, who are they going after? These Saracens and these infidels. Yeah, they were talking about going after the Sephardic Jews and the Moors. So why would English people fear the Inquisition, right, if they weren't Sephardic Jews or Moors? Numerous studies of the so-called lost colony of Roanoke have attempted to locate survivors among the mixed tribes of North Carolina, including the Occaneechi, the Lumbee, Tuscarora, Kohari, and various Algonquin groups in the area. All right, this is deep right here. C.D. Bruinton, a distinguished native of Sampson Company, wrote The Five Civilized Indian Tribes of Eastern North Carolina, with historical facts about these Indians whose descendants are still here, and evidence of their intermarriage and life with the so-called whites. All right, they're naming European whites. All right, from Sir Walter Raleigh's Lost Colony, but they weren't whites. All right, we know that the word white and white people did not exist. The word even white was not mentioned until 60 years later, 67 years later, after Jamestown was founded. Anybody even considered white? So these so-called whites were not even white. All right, we're talking about Sephardic people. They got Mediterranean customs. They're saying their last names are, and that's why they're saying the genealogical history tells a different story. And again, they were mixing with natives, right? What else would they do if they get left behind? What else are they going to do? They got to survive for the people who know how to survive. And yeah, Indians are that welcoming to take on people. If they really respect their customs and stuff, they adopt people, or take them as servants. Either way, you're better off than dying, right? Now it says, yet an equal number of books and articles have attempted to demonstrate that the Englishmen and women from Roanoke colony could not have survived for long in the wilderness and so never managed to join together with local Indians. They claim that Virginia there, probably a Jewish surname in origin, see chapter 1, the first whites, right, in parentheses, right, they know what they mean, child born in English America, and John White's granddaughter probably died of starvation in the woods or fell with an Indian tomahawk in her skull. There are significant genealogical indications of the lost colonies blending with the Indians, however. The 1790 federal census includes a fourth column between the number of females and slaves in the household designated to enumerate other free persons. It was left to the census taker how to interpret this category. All right, so that's deep. We find that a lot when we're doing genealogy and we're reading these census. A lot of the time it was whatever the census taker interprets, right? When he hears or he sees somebody, oh, she looks mulatto to me. Oh, that looks like an Indian. Oh, that looks like a so-called Negro. Black, Oh, I think they're from here. Let me put that down. A lot of the time is whatever the census taker is putting down or interpreting. So in Sampson County, North Carolina, home of the Kohairi or Kohairi Indians, one of the claimed descendant groups of Roanoke settlers. All right, you see that? Gotta look into that. The enumerator seems to have used it for Jews and Indians. Bruinton's ancestors, for instance, are listed as other in the household of Aunt Bruinton, where there are 3 others and nobody else, a whole household of others. So what are they? They're saying those are the Indians, individuals listed only by first name like Hannah and Old Nat can probably be identified as taxed Indians, all right? All right, you only find the first name. We find that a lot in genealogy too. All of a sudden, it's just a lady with first name. What's her last name? Nobody knows. Nobody knows her last name. All right. Mixed breeds living in the settlement, so taxed Indians or mixed breeds living in the settlement rather than with other Indians in the interior. This was certainly an odd direction for Indians of any sort to be moving, and taxed Indians are found in only a few other locations in early America. The Virginia frontier in Pittsylvania County, that's in Virginia, was one. All right, so I've gotten some people in their genealogy to that in this county right here, so that's very interesting. More other households from Sampson County with their number of members include our Joseph Williams, or Hannah Williams, Nathaniel Revel, Jack Walden, Cressy Lucretia, William, Old Nat, Molly Cluis, Rachel Green, Cloralee, Mary Wiggins, Levi Emanuel, Becky Cobb, David Terry, Ephraim Emanuel, John Flowers, Abraham Jacobs, John Emanuel, Jack Maynard. A lot of the times, just a side note here, Jack is a short or nickname for Jacob. I found that out recently. A lot of the times They just go by Jack, but it actually comes from Jacob. And we have already got in the book Sephardic Jewish surnames. So we got a great book there that we read from. The Jackson surname actually goes back to sons of Jacob, Jack's sons, or sons of Jacob, Jacksons. All right. So side note there. So again, Jack Maynard, John Cooper, White, Jesse Emanuel, Nicholas Emanuel, Moses Carter, Henry Carter, and Patty Wiggins. Neighboring North Carolina counties, Dublin, Bladen, Brunswick, Johnston, Onslow, and New Hanover have heads of household falling in the same category. Although not as many, we mark names that are likely Jewish or crypto-Jewish with an asterisk. So Davis, I know Davis goes back to David, right? Isabella Jones with 2 slaves, Boone, Samuel Bell, many of the Joneses, the Barfoot, Jacob or Jacobs, altogether Pages, Burnett, Johnston, Perry. Perry's a Sephardic surname, Chas and Kalop, the Mary from Tamar. All right, the Mary is Tamari, right? Tamar. One of the wives of Judah, an Egyptian. Tamar, a wife of Judah. He married an Egyptian. Yeah. Kumbo, James Sweet, Green, Freeman, Williams, Grimes, maybe Grimes, Hannah with 1 slave, Catherine Wren, Powell, Hesse with 3 slaves, Carvers or Chavers. All right, the Chavis, I mixing with Indians. A lot of this Chavis goes back to Sephardic name. Mixing with Indians here. A lot of these families again mixing with the Indians. Just so you know, Sanders, Jim Boyd, Genoy with 6 slaves, Ithcock and Scott. Got a lot of the Chavis. Shout out to my Catawba brothers listening in right now. Shout out to the Catawba Saponis. Many of these names are either Melungeon or Sephardic Jewish or both. A common name in the Lumbee tribe that probably derives from a medieval Jewish name is Brave Boy. Brave Boy. All right. That's not that's not an Indian name. It's actually medieval Jewish times too. In 1292, census of Paris lists numerous wealthy Jews from Brabant, a Flemish city, with ties to the cloth, weaving, and woolen industry of Lombardy, the Brabant Brebois, Bradby, a family that supplied multiple chiefs to the Pamunkey Indians of Virginia. Maybe a corruption. All right. All right. So again, this relationship, we're gonna get, we're gonna try to dig into all of this, try to really understand everything, right? Understand really what's going on, the true history. We gotta, again, if it's males coming in, they took on, most of the time they married for trade, for business. We got this again with the Acadians, right? They were marrying the women. A lot of them in Louisiana, the Choctaw women were lining up. They were lining up the Choctaw women. And before that, in Acadian Canada, the Metis women, a lot of the Algonquin, Botoc women, they'd like almost written Botoc out of history. A lot of them ended up in Cape Verde and other colonies. And they were described as Swarty, all these Indians. We got pictures of the Pamunkey Indians colorized. These all Swarty people. All I see is so-called black people. So what Europeans are mixing with them? Because they don't look white to me. You get what I'm trying to tell you? So a lot of these were black Europeans. It's just, we thought they were all white. We're losing that part. We always thought it was slave masters or European, white, British, Christians. None. It wasn't like that. Again, what's the name of this video today? Virginia's not so English colony, the Sephardic Moorish Jamestown and Roanoke history. All right, thanks for tuning in. It says here, Jamestown colony 1607. After the failure of Roanoke colony, interest in establishing a foothold in the New World waned with the deaths of Raleigh, Greenville, and ultimately Elizabeth herself. Even before the Queen's final years, remember we're talking about Queen Elizabeth, who had ties with what? The Arab Sultan of Morocco. All right, we broke that down many times. Just Google it right now if you like. That was her ally. Queen Elizabeth, Protestant, leaned more towards Protestantism. So even before her death, the queen's final years, however, Raleigh and his party had fallen out of favor. In 1594, public sentiment turned against Sephardic Jews when intriguers trumped up charges of treason against Elizabeth's court's physician Rodrigo Lopez. All right, so she got for Sephardic Jews working for her all over the place. All right. A decade later, a brief peace treaty with Spain scrapped most of the new colonization plans. But in 1606, Elizabeth's successor, James I, right? So he's the took over. Remember, now we're coming in with Catholicism. James I granted a charter to the Virginia Company. All right. Again, James Stewart. All right. James Stewart, the Stewart Swarty, right? Swart. James I. King James, the King James Version, right? He authorized the version of the Bible. That's what most people read today. He left out some books. All right. Why you do that, James? It says here, granted a charter to the Virginia Company to attempt a new beginning in North America, a new beginning, a commercial venture. All right. This is a business venture. All right. This is not about taking risks and going to Africa. This is a real commercial venture from the outset. The corporation was subscribed to and underwritten by the major merchants of lawyers of London. All right. We broke down who were these lawyers, these merchants of London. These were Moorish Sephardic people, many of which had financial ties with Amsterdam's bustling Sephardic enclave. All right. They had a whole network. Remember that. On May 13th, 1607, 3 small English ships reached the mouth of James River on the Virginia coast after being diverted from the original goal of Chesapeake Bay. One was commanded by Captain Christopher Newport and carried 71 persons. A second under Captain Bartholomew Gosnold bore 52 persons, and the third, captained by John Radcliffe, had 21 persons aboard. No list of these original settlers survives, but we know that among them were Edward Wingfield, John Martin, who had accompanied Sir Francis Drake in early days, John Smith, George Kendall, George Percy, the Earl of Northumberland's brother, the Reverend Robert Hunt, and Gabriel Archer, an attorney and explorer. A resupply vessel arrived in 1608 carrying 70 additional settlers, among whom were Matthew Scribner, and 2 women, a Miss Forrest, perhaps Da Silva, and her maid Anne Burras, or Burroughs Sephardic surname. All right, letting you know who were they really colonizing Virginia with. A few months later, Anne Burras, who became Burroughs, right, was married to one of the settlers, John Leyden, likely from Leyden, Holland, a Protestant and crypto-Jewish seed of learning. All right, crypto-Jewish, so-called Protestant. All right, you see the patterns here? In summer 1609, another ship arrived with 400 unnamed settlers who were taken on from among the impoverished and criminal element in England. All right, again, no Africans here. These are the people that putting in the plantations to work. During the ensuing winter, 1609 to 1610, the colony was decimated by disease, starvation, and its numbers fell from 500 persons to around 60. In May 1610, a new governor, Sir Thomas Gates, or Goetz, arrived with reinforcements, apparently from Poland and Netherlands. All right, more people. They're getting rid of people of Europe. Who are these people they're getting rid of? Remember what Benjamin Franklin said about the Polish, about the Netherlands people, about the Spaniards, Portuguese, all Swarty. These are all Swarty people. Swarty. All right. Both were countries to which Jews were pouring in at this time. What countries? Again, Poland and Netherlands. The Prussians, the Polish Prussians. Who's the Prussians coming over? Again, these are Sephardis, a lot of them Moorish people under the Prussian Protestant title. Sephardim to newly liberated lowlands, and Scottish crypto-Jews to Poland. Scottish crypto-Jews, all right? It all comes together, especially from Aberdeen. In the meantime, Lord de la Warr, stopped by to observe the colony. Dr. Lawrence Boham, or Boone, Sephardic, all right, Boone is Sephardic. We're talking about person of color, the Boones or the Boone, was on hand experimenting with medicinal herbs and botanicals. A list of known passengers aboard Gates' ship, the Sea Venture, is given in Appendix E. All right. Much love and respect to everybody tuned in. Appreciate the donation. Thank you very much. Indigenous Mind. Hope you guys enjoying this. You know, we're breaking this down. This is a great chapter. A lot of major drops here we can follow up on. It says here in May 1611, Sir Thomas Dale arrived in Virginia colony with supplies, farm animals, and 300 settlers. All right. More people. During this time, Samuel Argwell, Anglo-Norman Jewish name, based on Greek Argos, all right, Mediterranean person, all right. The same Samuel Argos we read was going up to Acadia. He was one of those English that were kicking out the Acadians and resettling them. Yeah, remember? So it all comes together. These people doing all these things. Anglo-Norman Jewish name, right? He's doing it to Huguenots. It's all business. Remember, they use English titles and Christian, and to them it's all about survival and business. All right, for their family. The Reverend Alexander Whitaker and Ralph Hammer, Arabic name as Seller, had also arrived. In 1616, Abraham Piercy, Cape merchant, took over management of the Virginia Company. Sorry about that. So he took over the management of the Virginia Company, this Piercy guy, store in the colony, while in 1619, John Pori, perhaps from Porat, a Moroccan for Joseph, Porat, Moroccan for Joseph, John Pori, Porat, Moroccan, Pori was secretary. Several of these surnames are Sephardic. Epidemics still swept the colony. Some 300 persons died during the 1618 winter. A critic back home charged, instead of a plantation, Virginia will surely get the name of slaughterhouse. All right. They were all dying, though. What was going on over there? New management was chosen. Sir Edwin Sands from Alexander became treasurer of the Virginia Company in 1618, and Sir George Yearley became governor of Virginia in 1619. John Nichols Farrar Smith Sephardic became members of the Virginia Corporation the same year. All right. It's all them. By 1620, the Virginia colony had another new governor, Francis Wyatt. All right. Arabic surname, Wyatt. You see, we're talking about Arabs here in 1600s, right? Muslim people being what? Governors, secretaries, you know, right? They didn't teach us none of this. They wanted us to think so-called white Christians, English Christians, right? Coming over. All right, you got to break the spell. This is deep. I'm really trying to like help you break the spell, man. We're really correct in history. All right. It says that he put a premium on obtaining female settlers. Economic efforts included timber production, wineries, and ironworks and glass manufacture. Mulberry trees were planted to foster silkworms and silk making. All these industries were ones in which Sephardic Jews, Moriscos, all right, and Ottoman Turks excelled. They brought their skills over here. Sericulture in particular was a secret art jealously guarded and known only to them. Sericulture. Only Sephardic Moorish people did that. All right, they brought that over to America. These so-called colonists. The flight of Huguenots, all right? Here goes the Huguenots from Catholic France beginning about 1575, brought silk manufacturing to England. So that why would they, who was really working the silk trade, right? It was Moors. So why do the Huguenots got this profession? Because they're the same. Again, we read earlier today in the video, right? What happened to the Moors when they went to southern France? What happened to the Moors, guys? When they went to southern France, they became known as the Huguenots. Huguenots. That's why they got this whole silk manufacturing in England, the Huguenots. So that by the end of the 17th century, Huguenots numbered as high as 80,000 Moors in London. Again, let me put it in more clear words. 80,000 so-called black people, 80,000 Negroes in London that were Huguenots in the silk manufacturing industry. All right? Moors. Many of them were silk weavers or skilled craftsmen in other textile arts in Shoreditch and Spitalfields. Only 2 or 3 generations removed from being Spanish or Italian Jews. All right, only a couple generations they were from Spain or Italy, Jewish. All right, what would we read about the Spanish Jews? That they were very dark skinned, so-called black. You got the sources in the beginning of this book, this video. The Constitution of the Virginia Company was rewritten in 1621, named now as proprietors were. All right. Here we go. Who were these proprietors? Sir Francis Wyatt, Governor, Captain Francis West, Sir George Yearley, Knight, Sir William Noose, Knight, Marshal M. George Sandys, Treasurer, Mr. George Thorpe, Deputy of the College, Captain Thomas Noose, Deputy for the Company, Mr. Powlett, Mr. Leach, Captain Nathaniel Powell, Mr. Christopher Davidson, Secretary Dr. Potts, Physician to the Company, Mr. Roger Smith, Mr. John Berkeley, Mr. John Roth, all right, John Roth. Did he have something to do with Pocahontas? Mr. Ralph Hammer, Mr. John Pontus, Mr. Michael Lapworth, Mr. Harwood, Mr. Samuel McCock, all right. Over the course of these arrivals, the surrounding Indian tribes had become increasingly disenchanted with the behavior of the colonists. They're like, yo, we're not feeling these people. What's wrong with them? They attacked the settlement in 1622, killing between 1/4 and 1/3 of the inhabitants. You know, I'm sorry to say, you know, so who are they really? Are they really killing white people? You get it? You know what I'm saying? Is this really Indians killing white people? I think about that because we just broke down their whole genealogy. Especially when we talk about Huguenots, right? Huguenots, Sephardic Jews, Moriscos. They attacked the settlement, right? And killing 1/3 of the inhabitants. Only a year later, Captain Henry Spillman, Jester, actor, especially in Purim Place, and his company were killed among others. In 1624, James I dissolved the Virginia Company and declared Virginia a royal colony. By that time, settlements in Virginia had moved well beyond Jamestown. Elizabeth City, for example, had approximately 350 residents. The glass factory was reestablished in 1624. Individual persons were permitted to establish their own settlements, bringing in colonists of their own choosing. All right, so they were given the headright system where they would get to bring in indentured servants, or as they call them, colonists. Right, they would get 50 acres of land for every person they would bring in. All right, a lot of people got like five indentured servants. That's 250 acres. It says to settle in Virginia at that time, one need only swear allegiance to British monarch and be sponsored by one of the land owners. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do to settle in Virginia. Thus, persons from any country were eligible to emigrate. Anybody. Many became landholders after working off their indenture, like I just said, until in 7 years' time. Again, this whole time they were calling them settlers and colonists, right? But these were really so-called what? So-called slaves. Because if these people turn out to be so-called Negro or known as black in history, then they start calling them slaves. And then they start calling them runaway slaves and masters owning them, and you know, all that other slave narratives. Indentured servitude was reality. People got stuck in indentured servitude, as you tell, yes. A lot of people came with indentures for life, prisoners of war, but it was indenture. It wasn't the Kunta Kinte stores we get. All right, a lot of these people, after their indenture got their freedom, and what? They got their own, like Anthony Johnson, they got their own so-called slaves. Anthony Johnson, so-called black man from Virginia, first slave owner who actually owned somebody for life. He went to court to fight. He went to court and won. All right. and so-called slave, right, who's taking him to court. How can a slave take somebody to court unless they're actually considered a person? Like they have a say, right? They have their word, and they had a contract, an indenture that they can fight in court. Now it says here one of the first of these outlying settlements, Berkeley 100, established in 1619. It included 35 colonists. Another group arriving in 1620 aboard the Supply included Nicholas Healy, the ancestor of one of the authors, who was descended from the same Healy family in Bristol that married into the Drake family, as mentioned earlier. All right, that reminds me of a book when we're talking about Bristol. All right, the Black population of Bristol in the 18th century. All right, Bristol, right, England. All right, we're gonna break that down. Bristol, Liverpool, and London, three major ports for people of color and towns and colonial medieval times, very populated with people of color, right? That's a whole history we're gonna break down. The Healy families from Bristol, they married into the Drake family. We know Drake is colored, all right? As mentioned earlier, others founding plantations and estates were Richard Pace, Nathaniel Causey, John Raffy, Isaac Madison, Samuel Maycock, Edward Liskey, a Czech name, Richard Biggs, Griville Pooley or Pole, Isaac Chapman from Jacob, the patriarch who was a traveling merchant, Edward Gorgany or Gorganas, Ashkenazi, Nathaniel Powell, Thomas Harris, English, Jewish, it says Samuel Jordan, and Mary Tu or Tuhi. Again, we see the appearance of Jewish surnames. In 1619, the Virginia Company sent 150 people to set up 3 ironworks under the charge of Captain Blue Ed. Eventually, these were taken over by John Berkeley and his son Maurice. At George Sandys Plantation, there was a Frenchman, Daniel Poole. All right, we got him before. Sephardic name, Daniel Poole, and 20 Italians. At Hughes Crowder's plantation, we find Richard Pace, perhaps originally Shalom or Solomon, William Perry, Sephardic, all right, Perry, Richard Richards, and Thomas Garcia. Christopher Loney's plantation was furnished with 100 immigrants and supplies sent to him by Richard Wiseman, a Moroccan name, Wiseman, Moroccan. All right, so I hope you guys are paying attention who these plantations are being filled up by, right? Apart from the native free labor they were enslaving, these are the other so-called slaves, so-called Negroes, right? That eventually in history were called Negroes or Africans in plantations, right? Wiseman, one of these financiers, who's the Moroccan ancestry, brought a lot of these people over. It says Nathaniel Bass, all right, Byzantine or Romania Jewish. Bass eventually moved to Virginia himself, as did Edward Bennett, a well-established London merchant. A Newport News there was Daniel Gookin, perhaps the same as German or Guggen, as in Guggenheim, a friend of Sir William News in Ireland, and at Mulberry Islands, Anthony Baram Arabic, William Cop from Jacob, and Joachim Andrews or Andros, Byzantine Greek or Romaniot. All right, so taking stock. What have we learned about Virginia's earliest colonists from 1587 to 1621? Huh? What have we learned today, guys? First, the majority of the settlers planted by Raleigh and Greenville at Roanoke, from the evidence provided by their surnames, motives of their sponsors, and the known ethnicity of Joachim Gans and Simon Ferdinando as Jews and conversos, were most likely not of English ancestry. These weren't English people. They were Sephardim and Moriscos. Again, what is a Morisco? Is a Muslim, a Moor. A Morisco is a Muslim Moor converted to Christianity. Look it up right now. Say, what is Morisco? Just put Morisco in Google and hit enter. So you can see I ain't making this up. All right. And they were willing to come to America to escape what they viewed as an even larger threat, right? The menace of Spain's invasion of England. Why was that a threat? Because they were Catholics, not because they were Spain, but they were going after the Catholics, right? because they're also Catholics. These Sephardic Moorish people are, I mean, not Catholic, but Spanish, right? They're Portuguese and Spain Iberians, Moors. So it's not a Spain versus England thing. You get it? So they were afraid of that. They're like, yo, let's just go to America. We'll be indentured, we'll work for somebody. Hopefully we don't have to work for anybody. We can pay our own way over there. But most couldn't. It says the initial colonists of Jamestown 10 years later do not appear to be all very Anglo-Saxon either. Although the latter arriving 400 renegades likely were British in that they probably did not enlist, but were tricked by those desirous of getting them out of the country. All right. Many of these were spirited away. All right. We got this in my indentured white servitude videos and my Swarthy European videos, and all my, how they were bringing them over the real Middle Passage, how they were spiriting away. That meant they were kidnapping a lot of these people, a lot of the children out of Europe. A lot of these were, again, so-called black people. They were getting rid of it over there, sending them over here. Again, and this was Moors on Moors, blacks on blacks. We're not just talking about white people getting rid of. No, it wasn't even like that. All right? It's deeper than that. Many of these were spirited away from alley houses where bounty hunters got them drunk and packed them off in the middle of the night before they knew what had happened. In any event, most of the two groups of early colonists perished unknown and unnamed, leaving no lasting legacy. So you see, all these people disappeared, right? Supposedly. All these people disappeared. They didn't leave no history, have no ancestors, no descendants, I mean. No, they do. Trust me, they do. The arrival in 1610 of Governor Gates finally does provide some names. Such persons as Sylvester Jourdain, Joseph Chard or Card, Francis Pierpoint, Edward Eason or Jason, and the like do not appear to be ethnically English either, but rather Sephardic refugees from France or Holland, Sephardic refugees. But this is deep right here. If you can't see how deep this is right here, we're talking about the founding of the colonies of America here by so-called black people. This is deep here. It says here in 1621, a total of 227 Walloons and French immigrants arrived to join a crowd of colonists emptied from the English port of Bristol the year before. The majority of these also were not persons of English descent. All right. Bristol had a large Sephardic community, one member of which, Nicholas Hill, is known to have been dark enough in coloring to have descendants classified as free persons of color. I ain't making this some generations later, right? Bristol had what? A large Sephardic community. All right. This is from the Bristol branch of the Historical Association of the University of Bristol, the black population of Bristol in the 18th century. Hope you guys are paying attention, not over there arguing in the chat. The majority of these also were not persons of English descent because Bristol had a large Sephardic community. All right, Nicholas Hill. All right. Now, the author of this book, this is one of his answers. I want you guys to pay attention. The author straight up said that he descends from this guy, one of the authors. And it's a white person today. But what is he saying about his ancestor? Nicholas Hill is known to have been dark enough, all right, dark enough in coloring to have descendants classified as free persons of color some generations later. All right. Yeah, the author's white. He's loving this. He's probably like, oh, I admire this young man for reading my book. And he's letting people know my ancestors are so-called black, but it's okay. I don't have to say it myself. Hey, don't worry, man. It's all good, man. A lot of so-called white people descend from so-called black people. They don't know it. All right. By 1624, we have the names Paul Sarrett compiled several communities then extend in Virginia. In this listing, there's an abundance of names that seem to be Morisco, Islamic, or Moorish. We're talking about 1620s. Hello, wake up, break the spell. Kurimeo, why you trying to make us European? I ain't trying to make you nothing. Do your genealogy. If you're feeling guilty about something, insecure about something, do your genealogy. All right? I'm not generalizing. I'm talking about everybody got a different individual story in their genealogy and thousands of ancestors, not just one, thousands of ancestors. And this list, and many of these, again, are most likely Morisco, Islamic, or Moorish, all right, of these original settlers of America. For example, Danan, Arabic judge; Fedem, Arabic; coins mint; hammer; kalam, Arabic; wise; while others would seem explicitly Jewish: Bagsel, Hebrew; anagram, Baruch or Baruch, blessed; Eli, goldsmith; Juman, Levet, and Moises. These observations contradict the received notion that the first Jews to arrive in North America were a boatload of Sephardic refugees from Recife, Brazil, who illegally came to the Dutch colony of New York from Curaçao in 1654. As mentioned above, Jews and Muslims were present in North America from Columbus' arrival at Hispaniola in 1492. All right, so that's a big point, because what he's trying to say is that the first so-called Sephardic refugees arrived from Brazil in 1654, but they've been here. He's letting you know, ever since Columbus and them came, they were Sephardic and Moorish people. And then the colonists in Roanoke and Virginia too. This was before 1654, so that was not the first. All right, that's mainstream lies. As mentioned above, Jews and Muslims were present in North America from Columbus' time, arrived at Hispaniola in 1492, long before the English arrivals at Roanoke and Jamestown. Indeed, we believe that even the promoters, Drake, Raleigh, Greenville, and other West Country gentlemen evinced Jewish roots. They broke this down. These are people of color. Raleigh is de la Raleigh. They anglicized their name. And the larger part of the early English colonization efforts in the New World was a Jewish enterprise, one whose overriding purpose was to relocate refugees from Iberian diaspora and its fallout in other countries. This is real history. Immigration patterns in Virginia after 1624 suggest an even stronger picture of the Sephardic and Morisco presence. The aptly named Abraham, leaving London in 1635, had on board Walter Piggott, Henry Dodd Bell, Alexander Symes or Simons, and Simon Farrell. See Appendix C. All right. The David that same year carried Robert Alsop, Robert Barron, or Baroon, and Guthrie Lovett or Levite. The Bonaventure, these are ship names, right? 1635, listed as passengers, among others, Basil, a Greek Basil book or Hebrew anagram, Robert Perry, again, remember Perry Sephardic last name, James Mazer, and Thomas Hyatt, Arabic Hebrew for tailor, each bearing a Sephardic surname. More and more persons of likely Sephardic and Morisco descent continued to arrive. The Elizabeth 1635 of London carried John Bagby, George Trevis, example from Treves and Alsey, and Ellen Shore, Hebrew Shore, Bull, related to the name Joseph. The Globe also in 1635 brought Robert Copin, diminutive of Jacob, William Savoy, Mitchell Hames, and Anne Levians, or Levi, right? Levians, which seemed obvious enough not to call for comment. And the Alice had on board Robert Hagara and Sophia Roderick, Roderick, or Rodriguez, or Rodriguez. In 1700, several boatloads of Huguenots, refugees arrived in Virginia. What? How many again, Kurimeo? Several boatloads. What Africans? What Africans are you talking about? Can you show me one slave ship, one ship from Africa? All right, not no made up story without no records. You're talking about there's a piece of wood down in the Louisiana there, and you found a piece of wood, and that's your evidence because you found a piece of wood under the water when there's many shipwrecks there under that same water. You know, what's your proof? When we got several boatloads of Huguenots. Again, what's a Huguenot, Kurimeo? What's a Huguenot, Kurimeo? Again, what did we read earlier? When the Moors, right? When the Moors got expelled from Spain and Iberia, they ended up in southern France, right? What happened in southern France? They became known as Huguenots. A lot of those Huguenots or Huguenot came over to the Americas. We got the whole drop. We got much drop on the Huguenots. Make sure to catch the previous videos. We just did a drop on the Acadians and their relation with the so-called Huguenots. We're talking about Moors, so-called black people, so-called black people. Just keep repeating it, so-called black people. Break the spell, so-called Negro people colonizing America. the colonists, settlers, the first Europeans, so-called Negro people, mostly Sephardic Morisco ancestry. Several boatloads, all right, several boatloads arrived from England, bringing these Moors. Many of these persons were likely Sephardic Morisco ancestry. Break the spell, all right? The reader is invited to take a look at the complete list in Appendix E and consider their implications for the ethnicity of the Virginia colony and colonial America. The names Jean Vidu and Jean Moreau are Jewish and Moorish, all right? Moreau, Moorish, respectively. Jacques Roy means that the ancestors of this Jacques or Jacob, right? Jacques, remember I told you Jack is Jacob. Jack is a nickname for Jacob. Remember I told you that Jacksons means sons of Jacob. The Jacksons, sons of Jacob, were in the employ of the King Roy, or else played the part of the king in Purim play. Francois Sasson bears a famous Jewish surname, Sassoon, Susan, dating from the Babylonian captivity. The exilars, these are the Babylonian exilars. They were in captivity in Babylon. We're talking about royal, we're talking about real biblical stuff here, right? We're talking about way back. Abraham Mullen was the ancestor of the Melungeon Mullins family. All right, this Melungeon, who? He was a Sephardic so-called black person. Francois or Francois du Tartre has a surname implying the person's ancestors were Tartar. Tartars. Jacques Broussais is a French cousin of the once Jewish Broussais or Bruce family of Scotland. The Bruce family is Broussais. The Bruces are Broussais. Isaac Simon Jordan bears a common French Jewish given and surname. Then there is Etienne Alcassan, a Turkish surname. Abraham Remy is a member of the French Jewish Melungeon family. Remy, Rame, Pierre Saracia's last name means literally Saracen or Muslim in French, Saracen. All these Saracens. What is the Papa Bull? What did the Papa Bull say? What did the Pope say? We got to go get all these Saracens and all these infidels and all these enemies of Christ. We got to take all their lands, all their possessions, all their kingdoms, principalities. Let's take everything from them. They made war on you. On some of your ancestors, not all of them. They made wars on the other ancestors completely, though. Not just to remove them, but to completely erase them. We're talking about the indigenous family of America. Unrecognized and unacknowledged, these are the persons who helped to create the old dominion. All right, these are the people. Famous figures. How about the really prominent Virginians, the aristocrats, the first families of Virginia? How about them, huh? The Byrds, the Lees, the Henrys. Our first glance at these families should be to see what they look like, right? Images of prominent people suggest that there's lies hitting a large Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, Iberian component and Virginia's colonial era population and their descendants. There lies hidden. William Byrd, the Byrds, right? So they're gonna, they show the whitewashed, they even tell us it's whitewashed paintings, right? Because they know he even said his ancestor was dark enough, so his ancestor would be considered free people of color. How can you mistake a white person for a free person of color? That's not gonna happen. Because it has benefits whether you are considered this or that. It has different, so they're gonna make sure to list it correctly. There's a reason they call them free people of color. These ain't white people. All right, William Byrd, the ancestor of the Byrds of Virginia, was the son of John Byrd, a London goldsmith. The earliest firm genealogical record for the family is mention of a Thomas Byrd, apprenticed to Henry Shaverill, a Hebrew anagram. So apprentice, right? If he was known to be a so-called black person, he would have been called a slave. So it would have said as a young, he was a slave to, but because he's a prominent London goldsmith, right? He was apprenticed only to Henry Shaverill. Vintner in 1608, subsequently admitted to the Wine Merchants Company in 1616. Thomas Byrd married his first cousin, Elizabeth Byrd. It was Thomas' son, John, who became a goldsmith. What is transparent from these records, given the occupations of wine merchant and goldsmith and the first cousin's marriage, all right, that's a common thing these Hebrews did. And no lie. Given the occupations, right, and what they were doing and who they were marrying, is that the Birds were Jewish. Bird was not an English name before this family became prominent. The first of the name probably came to England as a court musician, like a Sephardic Antons mentioned earlier, musicians. A relative was William Byrd, the Renaissance court composer. All right, publicly they were not Jewish. All right, so they had a cover. As Jews were officially banned from England until 1664, they were what? Crypto-Jewish. The Byrds were crypto-Jewish, as were so many other persons in London, or secret Jews, so-called colored people. It is likely that at least the first generation officially practiced Catholicism, the religion of their parent country. English custom in London and other major cities allowed Spanish and Portuguese Jews as foreigners to worship at their own parish churches, which are presumed to be Catholic. All right, because it's all business. We need them. They're like, yo, stick around, guys. Like, we don't want you guys to practice but stick around. You guys make us money. You guys help us with the money, the trade, and colonizing and all that. Stick around. William Byrd came to Virginia at the request of his uncle, Captain Thomas Stige, who was childless and designated William his heir. Although the exact date is unknown, his arrival was probably around 1670. The Stags were traders with the Indians, all right? Primarily the Catawbas and Cherokees. What Cherokees? What do you mean by that? All right? Could be other tribes, other Sepones, other Algonquin tribes, mixing in, eventually being known as Cherokee, Seminoles, other people. Very broad term when we're talking about Cherokee. That word didn't exist before Europeans arrived. Another profession markedly Jewish. Upon reaching adulthood and receiving his inheritance, Byrd entered the lucrative triangular trade between Virginia, Barbados, and Africa. All right, that's the hijack. Tobacco, deerskins, sugar, rum, and slaves were the primary commodities of exchange. Typically, those who plied this trade imported slaves from Portuguese middlemen of the Guinea coast of Africa, and we're gonna dodge the hijack big time because we already know, we broke that and debunked that in so many ways. Who were the Portuguese really enslaving? Again, let's check out the sources of what the Portuguese were saying and who they were going and putting under, all right, in their free labor and their encomiendas in all these places in their colonies. Rum and sugar were taken on board and transported to Virginia. American planters paid for rum, sugar, and slaves and tobacco, or deerskin, and received credit in England or Scotland, paid out to them in manufactured goods, supplied on the steady stream of ships carrying new colonists, except for the profit margin of the merchants, frequently Jews. No money changed hands. This only in England, thus preserving the mother country's prohibition about allowing specie or spices to flow into the colonies or accumulate there. In 1673, Byrd married Mary Hormenden, whose lineage goes back to the St. Leger family of Cornwall, mentioned in chapter 1. Very importantly, biographer Alden Hatch tells us that this St. Leger family traces ancestry back to Bowden III, king of Jerusalem during the Crusades, who was evidently Jewish descent. Byrd soon became Receiver General of the King's Revenue, as well as Auditor of Virginia. As Hatch notes, he both collected the taxes and audited them. There are other strong cues regarding Byrd's ancestry and religious leanings. Hatch states that Byrd regarded Catholics as but one degree above the devils from hell. All right? So he wasn't really Catholic, you see. In 1699, when the Huguenots were under attack, once again by Catholic monarchs. Why are the Huguenots being attacked by Catholics? Because they're Moors. It was William Byrd of Virginia who championed their cause. William said, yo, Huguenots, cousins, come over here, I got you. About 300 of them were brought to safety in Virginia. 300 Moors? Who brought them over? Their cousin William Byrd. All right, you guys see what's going on here? Byrd for 3. Where'd you get that last name, Byrd? Byrd for 3. Where'd you get that last name, Byrd? 300 Moors to Virginia in 1699 and another 200. And then, so that's that, 500 Moors. Let me say it a different way. 500 so-called black people. All right, because we got 500 Moors being brought by William Byrd, largely as a result of the arguments presented by William Byrd to the Board of Trade between 700 and 800 Huguenots. 800 Huguenots or 800 Moors settled in Virginia. Thank you, Byrd, for bringing your cousins. Such activities are in complete conformity with the efforts begun in the late 1500s by Raleigh and Drake to settle their Sephardic and Morisco kinsmen in the New World. Again, family, cousins. I'm not making this up. You think I'm joking? You think I'm joking? Both Raleigh and Drake had assisted the Huguenots in France before and after the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, when the Catholics murdered and massacred a lot of these Moors. In the 1705 edition of History, Robert Beverley wrote of the goodness and generosity of Colonel Byrd toward these distressed Huguenots, Moors. Beverley goes on to say, upon their first arrival in the country, he, Byrd, received them with all the tenderness of a father, and ever since has constantly given them the utmost assistance, employing all his skills and all his friends to advance their interests both publicly and privately. What liberties has he not all along allowed them on his own plantations to furnish themselves from thence corn and other necessaries? His mills have been at their service to grind their corn toll-free. With what zeal did he represent their cause to the assembly? And with what earnestness, did he press all his friends in their favor? So you hear what they're saying, right? They're like, yo, what is the reason he's helping all these people? He's using our funds and he's using all our processes to help. Who authorized this? They're like, who authorized this, man? Why is he helping all these people? Because that's his kinsman, that's his family. He was like a father to them. Like a father, that's his family. Who? Huguenots? No, Moors. Yeah, Moors. So-called black people. Yeah, wow. Byrd was attended in his final days by one of them, his valet, Jean Morat, who bears a common Sephardic Arabic surname. William Byrd's son, William II, was educated in England, where he learned Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Micaiah Perry, nearly invariably a Sephardic name, as we have seen, was William Byrd Sr.'s factor and agent in London, and looked after William Byrd Jr.'s welfare as a student abroad. In 1705, John William returned to Virginia and took over the family's several mercantile and milling interests. He had an avid interest in medicine and special fascination with the properties and profits in ginseng. This was a root gathered by ginseng melungeons, and shipped as far away as China during the late 1700s by Daniel Boone and John Jacob Astor from Astoria. Now that is deep. I didn't know that. That's a major drop right there. So wait a minute. You're supplying China with ginger from America, Melunge Indians, right? I thought ginger and all that was I thought they were supplying us. Ginger, right? Did you know Melungeons were supplying Chinese with ginger? American Indians and people with Sephardic ancestry that mixed with Melungeons? I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all. I didn't picture that ever. And Daniel Boone was all up in it. Daniel Boone was like, yup, making money off that. All the way up in China. All right? And his boy Jacob Astor from Astoria. William Byrd II married Lucy Park. Lucy's sister Frances would later marry John Custis, probably a Sephardic ancestry. All right. Hatch also reports from transcriptions of Byrd's private diary that he would read 1 or 2 chapters of the Bible in the Hebrew every morning, since the Hebrew Bible does not contain the New Testament. No hijacks allowed, he said. No, that New Testament, he said, hey, I'm going to read the real Bible. He said, I'm going to stick with the Hebrew Bible, not the New Testament thing right there, that Christianity thing. We must assume that William was reading the Torah. Hatch continues, Byrd was very strict about keeping the Sabbath. He would allow no work to be done that could possibly be avoided. And even when it could not be helped, he was uneasy in his conscience and sought a biblical excuse. Also, according to Hatch, Byrd frequently ducked going to Christian church. In our view, These descriptions illustrate crypto-Jewish behavior. Oh, he got that crypto-Jewish behavior. I smell a crypto Jew. I smell a crypto Jew. That's what he's saying. Now it says here the leaves of Virginia. And again, thank you for tuning in. We're almost done. We got a couple, like 2 or 3 more pages, and we're done. And we're going into the Lee family of Virginia. The Lee family, huh? It's perhaps most noted for producing General Robert E. Lee. All right, commander of the Confederate Army during the Civil War. All right, so who was this Lee guy really? Was he a white guy? But the family's history in Virginia goes back much farther. The genealogy shown below indicates that the founder, Richard Lee, was born in England in 1618 and immigrated to Virginia in 1640, his wife was Anne Constable. By the first generation, one daughter, Anne, had married a man very likely Sephardic Jewish, Thomas Joel. The next generation sees Richard Lee marrying Martha Silk, also Sephardic surname, and Philip marrying Sarah Brooke, or Baruch, which means blessed in Hebrew. By the third generation, Lees are marrying their close cousins, the Corgins or Cohens, priest, and the sisters, probably also Jewish, Mary and Annie, Eliet, Arabic for prominent person. All right, so Ailet is Eliot, fourth generation, Lees twice married into the Livingstons, right? Livingston, Grimes, and Ball families elsewhere in this book identified to be of Sephardic origin. All right, Livingston or Livingston, maybe, same. They are marrying only close of kin. All right, they keep it in the family. 3 other Lees and another Fendel with Sephardic height, Hayat, Arabic, and William Byrd, Page, Jewish surname, Toston for good measure. By the 6th generation, they have married Carters and another Cutis Custis. Although it was claimed at one time that the Lee family was sprung from Norman knight Rainier de Lega, who arrived in England in circa 1200, Richard Lee actually came from the modest Worcestershire family. Its founder was John Lee Lies, a clothier whose business was in the West Midlands. His mother was Jane Hancock, whose family were also cloth merchants. Richard Lee's older brother, John, was apprenticed to a Hancock Kingsman, who was a wine merchant in London. All right, so his brother was being apprenticed to a family member. That's a common thing, right? A lot of these so-called slaves and these censors are actually family. All these apprenticeships, just like William Ellison, right? He was apprenticed to somebody. Supposedly that's his slavery time because he never worked in the field. He was actually just an apprentice. Most likely it's a family member or somebody they knew. You know, we got that drop. Make sure to get that video, William Ellison. All right, we did that video. Continuing, it says Richard Lee's older brother. All right, yeah. So it says an origin similar to the Byrds. The exact date of Richard Lee's arrival in Virginia is unknown. But by 1643, he was named Attorney General for the colony. Very much like the first Byrd, he began to profit not only from the income brought by his public offices, but also by trading with the Indians. For fur and skins. Who was doing that a lot? The Acadians, who was the first fur and courier du Bois, the Huguenots, who these French fur traders. And you see these so-called English also doing the, man, it's just a family business. It's not about English or French or anything like that. That was the trade they were in. They were about making money. Who? Sephardic Moorish people. They were what? About business, making money. They had to trade everywhere they went. Monopolized the trade, made some commerce, made money. By 1650, he had risen to become Secretary of State for Virginia. By this time, he had also established a trading connection with the Netherlands, the Center for Sephardic Commerce. I remember New Jerusalem. Where was New Jerusalem? In Amsterdam. What was in Amsterdam? Plenty of Sephardic Moorish, so-called black people. Who's the Black Dutch? Check out the video we did on that. Who's the Black Dutch? Who's these Black Dutch, really? The Center for Sephardic Commerce. Lee sponsored 38 indentured servants from Holland, whom he settled on headright, land granted to him for bringing them over as colonists. All right. So how much did he just get? Do the math. All right. 38 indentures. That's 50 acres per servant. All right. 50 acres for each indentured servant he got. He got land granted to him. That's what's going on at the time. Repetitive exploitation of the headright system, all right? Exploitation. Some people were taking advantage of this, man. And of course, this is what I tell people when we do their genealogies and stuff is, you know, if you got a lot of family back in Europe and you're about to get a land grant, right? A headright system land grant, right? Why not bring your family than strangers, right? If you got 30 cousins, I'm gonna bring all my cousins over, right? My uncle, everybody, Pete, Uncle Little, cousin little Timmy, everybody, the dog, everybody. I'm gonna bring everybody I can. Yo, 50 acres for the dog. Hell yeah, put him as a person right there. Put him. His name is, you know, you know. But that's what I would do, right? And that's what a lot of these people did. A lot of these people supposedly bringing in cousin slaves. You know, they're not just slaves they're bringing over, or so-called Africans they're bringing from England, because that's what they really want you to think. It's like Africans coming from Europe, because they ain't coming directly from Africa. If these are so-called black people, and we know they are, right? So it says Lee continued to sponsor Dutch, evidently Sephardic indentured servants. All right, Dutch, who's the black Dutch, Sephardic Dutch, and the indentured servants, who's the real slaves, and reaped increasingly large rewards. You making money of this trade, large rewards, all right, money, making money. One of Lee's sons, Francis, returned permanently to London in 1677, where he helped manage the family's international trade and ventures. Another, Thomas, negotiated in the 1740s with the Iroquois Indians to obtain rights to 500,000 acres west of Virginia. Wow, that's a lot of land. The Iroquois are giving up. I wonder where the Iroquois got all this land, right? Because in case you guys don't know, and I'm sorry if anybody gets hurt by hearing this, because it's just history, the Iroquois are from Canada. They're not even from USA, right? They came into and they invaded and moved out and enslaved a lot of other tribes. So them giving away 500,000 acres, whose land are they giving away, these Iroquois? All right, think about that. Forming the Ohio Company. The Ohio Company, who's over there? The Sioux, right? Where the Sioux come from, originate? The Sioux from Ohio, from the Ohio Valley. The Sioux, right? They split, they went East Coast, and then some went to what they call in the plains, right? To the west. The Sioux. The Catawbas are Sioux. They ended up in the East Coast. The Catawbas, the ponies. Right? So this was their original land, Ohio. And who was over there? Iroquois. Taking over that and then giving it away. The company had Lawrence Washington, brother to George, as one of the presidents, and was operated by the Lee family for several generations. Their surveyor used to map the company's land grants boundaries was Christopher Gist, Indian agent, guide, and spy for Governor Edmund Atkins in Maryland, and later for General Washington's and Braddock. Gist was the son of Captain Richard and Sephora Moray Gist, and grandson Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector of the Commonwealth. What? Gist's descendants became openly Jewish and joined the Reformed Synagogue in Cincinnati, Ohio. All right. So yeah, you know, there's some real history right there. I just want you to think about, you know, where to get those 500,000 acres from. So willingly giving it up. Patrick Henry. Our final nominee is Patrick Henry, staunch patriot and one of the primary architects of the American Revolution. All right. We're talking in code here when they're talking about architects. Who's the architects? We're talking secret codes here. We're talking about Masonic words here. All right. And again, we got to dodge the hijack with the whitewashing, right? He told us straight up, the author already, that these are whitewashed pictures. This is how they drew them. We already know what's up with the wigs and all that, right? How they drawing the Jacobites, right? How they drawing all these people. It is William Byrd's diary, which provides us with some initial clues about his ancestry. Patrick's mother was born Sarah Winston. She first married Colonel John Sim, Hebrew Simone, who died shortly after their marriage. On October 7, 1732, Colonel Bird dropped in to see her and wrote later in his diary, she was a portly, handsome dame of the family of Esau, calling them Edomites. It's not me calling them Edomites or Esau's descendants. Bird testimony firmly establishes that Mrs. Syme was a Jewish and her late husband a Muslim. A Muslim. I'm talking about colonial times, right? Shortly after that visit, Miss Syme married a close kinsman of her late husband's, John Henry of Aberdeen, Scotland. The Symes and the Henrys were first and second cousins, and members of both families immigrated to Virginia colony in 1736. The Henrys' son, Patrick, was born on the family's plantation in Hanover County, where 6 out of 12 of the governors were kinsmen. All right, they were all family. You see what's going on? He's saying random people. It's all family, a whole network here. Who's colonizing, creating the 13 colonies? All right. Yeah, there's books out there that say, yeah, the 13 colonies was created by black man, but they don't explain the whole thing. And they're still adding this African hijack into it. They need to update their information. But much love and respect to them for bringing that out or that awareness to us so we can dig in further like we're doing right now. In 1736, again, he was born there. These are all kingsmen, all these governors. As acknowledged by the author, The Phase of Our Father, a study of religious beliefs and practices of the men who were most prominent in the founding of the United States. Henry's father, Colonel John Henry, had the most distinguished formal education, being a graduate of the rigorous classical curriculum of Scotland's famous Aberdeen University. His sons went on to become an eminent lawyer and delegate to the Virginia House of Burgesses and Continental Congress, and achieved fame as one of the most outspoken champions of the American independence. He was also the 14th largest landholder in Virginia. His first wife was Sarah Shelton, his second, the woman known to history as Dorothea Spotwood Dandridge. Henry Winston, but neither marriage produced any children, and so we can trace his genealogy no further. All right. So now I tell you, be careful with that, because doing genealogy, we found out a lot of the people that supposedly they didn't know if they had ancestry or no known records exist to know if they had an ancestry, turn out to be the person I'm doing the genealogy for. So a lot of times, because it's very known or obvious that it becomes so-called free people of color, they tell you, oh no, we can't, there's no further, nope, that's it, he didn't have no kids. So that's why we dig on that. We dig on these things and we dodge the hijack right there. We try to see if it's really the case. These observations about the settlement of Virginia and its first family strengthened suspicion that the Virginia colony's leading promoters, founders, early settlers, and later its statesmen were not the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. All right, they weren't what? They weren't no Anglo-Saxon white Protestants paraded through the pages of traditional American histories. This is what you read in school. This is what in the textbooks that we learned all our lives. They still got it in the textbooks right now as I speak. They haven't changed it. Knowing all this information exists, knowing all this genealogy and history, they got the records, right? I'm doing ancestry from their website and their records, proving all this information. So they know, right? They kept this away, right? Turn you into so-called Negro, so-called Black, so-called African American, forget who you really are, all your lines. We thought again that these were all white people. That's what's written in these traditional American histories, but at least partially Sephardim, Moriscos, and others. These figures should be recognized as her cultural and political architects.